Welcome everyone to this week's Tech Threads interview. Today I have with me Blake Bohacek, who is a director of product management at Lucid. And today we kind of have an interesting episode. Normally we kind of talk about, stakeholder management, very niche subjects in product, project, and program management. But today we're going to talk all about product management and kind of what skills you need to transition from different stages of product management into, higher levels, and what, other tips Blake has for us, because he's a very seasoned veteran at product management. We were just talking about his kind of path into product earlier. But before I get started and we jump into some questions and some discussions, Blake, I'm going to pass it off to you so you can just kind of explain who you are, what you've done, some of the cool projects you've worked on. So take it away.
Well, hey, thanks so much for having me. Like you mentioned, Blake Bohacek, I'm a director of product management at Lucid. And you talk about like what are some of the fun projects we're working on. I have the privilege of working with our amazing developer platform team. And one of the things that I love about what we're doing is we're really helping people turn ideas into reality. And for me, that is something that like hits super close to home because that's like fundamentally what product managers do. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. I remember in my internship, because I did an internship in IT project management, we used Lucid all the time to diagram databases and use those in presentations and send them out. So I'm very familiar with it, but it's a great thing you're working on. I think it's really cool, the experience you have. And like you were mentioning earlier, kind of your unorthodox path into product. I think just you growing, kind of being self-taught, like you said, has a lot of insights into like the practicality of what people need for product management and to be successful in product management. But like I said, I kind of want to just walk through like the life cycle of a product manager, starting from, getting into product, leading all the way up to where you're at right now as you're a director of product management. And you've kind of passed through every single step in that process. I know you kind of mentioned nowadays it's a completely different field and it's very hard to get into. Why? Can you explain like what you think is the best way to get into product and maybe some of the challenges that people are facing now to kind of get into that first product style role?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get that question a lot, and a lot of people talk about like, hey, how can I leverage your experience to walk the same path? And to be frank, the experience that I had is much harder today. Like over a decade ago is when I started, and I started as like a knowledge worker who had a unique set of skills that the company needed to build product. And that's where I got lucky, if I'm being completely honest. They took a bet on me, which is still possible today. Don't get me wrong. Like there's still a lot of people who work in close proximity to product, who showcase their skills and build trust, and then they get hired. But it's much harder from like an external perspective, and that's largely due to risk, right? Nowadays, you've got a lot of these schools who are doing product management specific courses. As part of those courses, some of them are doing where you're founding a product during school, and you're getting the experience of going and pitching to VCs and talking about value proposition and so on and so forth. Whereas you didn't have that back then, right? And so I think like that's the big challenge that we have today is there's just a lot of really well-educated people hitting the market at one time.
Right. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting because it is true. Like I know like BYU in Utah, they have an amazing entrepreneurship department and program where, yeah, people are pitching to VCs and starting their own products and they're getting like bought out and they're like being successful. So, and like you said, back in the day, this didn't really exist because product management, I feel like, at least for me, is a more newer, field, kind of like client success. Like it's one of these new things because of technology. It's kind of like become a thing. So now people are trying to jump on the bandwagon of it. And yeah, it's just fluctuating with so many, people who are trying to get into product. I know you've on LinkedIn, you've mentioned a little bit about networking and your kind of guide to networking. What advice would you give people about networking when it comes to like either getting into product management roles or starting when you're in like a company to kind of transition more into a product management role?
Yeah, I mean, like there's some basic do's and don'ts, right? Like the very first don't, if I want to kind of spotlight a big one, what people don't understand is when you reach out and you start with, "Will you recommend me?" You have to understand and put yourself in the perspective of the other person's shoes, right? Like, for example, at Lucid, if I were to go to bat for somebody, then to some degree, I'm putting my own integrity on the line, right? And now, don't get me wrong, everyone needs to stand on their own, but like there is an element of I'm questioning my own integrity. And so I don't love when people reach out and they're like, without any history, without any relationship, and say, "Hey, can you recommend me?" Instead, a lower friction way of doing it is, "Can you make an introduction?" Right? Like that is lower friction. I'm not putting my neck on the line. It's simply, can you help me get connected with the right people? Right. So that's like one of the don'ts at the very beginning. One of the big
Yeah.
do's is to establish a relationship before you're asking for help, right? And I know that that's really hard, and I know that it doesn't sound like I'm being empathetic when I say that, but trust me, like my DMs are open, right? For example, there was someone who reached out not too long ago where their invitation was all about going and playing disc golf. And I probably shouldn't say this because now I'm going to get blown up. But I'm a disc golfer, right? I love it. It's fun walking in the park. It's fun to get outside. Somehow this person figured it out and they said, hey, would love to go play around with you. And we go play around and we played half the time without even talking about product. We just got to know each other. We got to know each other's families. And it was a really good conversation. And at the tail end, he started subtly implying that he was interested in product management. But at this point, I was really invested in this person, right? Like I heard about them. I was really enjoying my time playing disc golf with them. And that's just one example of let's be human, right? Like I'm not anything special. There's nothing difference between me and you, right? I just might have some connections that you don't have, like you have some connections that I don't have, right? But it means a lot when someone's investing in our relationship before they're asking for something in return, right? And so like that's a big focus of mine is how can you develop that personal relationship before you start diving into the help you need and so on and so forth.
Mhm. I think that's something that a lot of people forget is that we're humans. And I feel like, at least for me, because I'm still in college, and I remember when I was like starting to make my network and connections, I'd look at these like higher up people and I'm like, I'm just on a whole different like you're so much higher than me. Like, why do I even talk to you? But yeah, I think it's that personal relationship, focusing on actually like getting to know the person. Because I know at least not nowadays, a lot of people like through Instagram and Instagram Reels, they like will push these like influencers who are going to get jobs and they just send a bunch of emails saying like, hey, can you reference me, can you reference me, and that's like their strategy to building these connections. But like you said, like putting your feet in someone else's shoes and kind of seeing it from your angle, like that's not like you're going to bat for them, you're putting your credibility on the line inside of the company. So that's a really, big ask that they're actually asking. So I think for a lot of people, especially, trying to get into either a new career field or product management, yeah, trying to build those relationships personally with a person is like a huge first step. For you who have already kind of gone through product management, does it change the way you network after you've gotten into a product management role, or does it stay relatively the same as like just building connections with people as you're, going through your path?
I my advice would be it shouldn't change, right? And quite frankly, it shouldn't just be within product management. Like my perspective on any relationship is you never know where the person on the other end is going to end up in life. Like they could be the next Elon Musk. They could be in a position where maybe they're a sales leader, right? And you want to have really valuable relationships across the board. And so any opportunity where you can leave a really good impression, you should be doing that. And from my perspective, like who you target, how you target them, so on and so forth, really shouldn't change because, quite frankly, as you're growing in your career, they're going to be growing in their career as well, right? And at the same point, like it's not uncommon, even here at Lucid or at other places, if there's like, for example, a senior level position that opens up, you can have junior PMs make referrals, right? And
Mhm.
so like that's an interesting, like if you're talking about what does mentoring look like as a
Mm.
senior PM versus a junior PM, sometimes your best references come from people that you choose to mentor, right?
Yeah.
Which is completely different than what I think a lot of people think about. It's when at that level, I need to have connections that are directors or VPs of product or chief product officers. And don't get me wrong, those relationships matter. I'm not discrediting those in any way, shape, or form. But it's also a really powerful message if all of a sudden a junior PM who's a crazy high performer in your org comes in and it's like, hey, I've been getting personally mentored by this person on the side just because they were interested in my career. I think they would make an amazing fit for this leadership position. Like that speaks volume, like to who that person is, to how they engaged, and so on and so forth. Like that's why I don't think networking should change as you grow throughout your career.
Yeah, it's just something you do constantly. I think that perspective, I've never personally heard that of like, you often think of it's normally like a junior person with someone more experienced, you're kind of that network, but it also goes backwards. Like I'm sure you've seen experiences where those junior PMs recommend other higher ups. It really helps them. And like you said, I think it's really important to remember that you never know where someone's going to be, in their career. They could be at one place now, but 10 years down the road, that's a long time. And someone
Yeah.
can do a lot of stuff in that time. So just keeping that human connection. And like me personally, I've loved, networking with people just to get to know them, regardless of like what job they're in. Because I think the more you know and the more different fields and people just the different ideas that you're exposed to that kind of help as you go along in the future. When we first started this call, you kind of mentioned a little about like the skills and the differences between like what it takes to be a director of product management between like a senior manager or like even just like a junior PM. What skills do you think are the most noticeable from someone who starts out as like a junior PM and moves their way up to director of PM? What kind of skills are the ones that kind of like push them through that pipeline?
Yeah, so if you're talking about like what is the one skill that helps, speed up a career, communication's a big one. Like it's a massive component. And that's something that I don't think the soft skills, I don't think that it's broadly talked about. Like when I'm in interview settings, it's largely talked about like what are the things they've accomplished and so on and so forth. And don't get me wrong, those matter. But if you can't tell a story that gets an org behind you, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything, right? And so being able to talk about your accomplishments in such a way where it feels like a picture book, if I'm being completely
Mhm.
honest, it's very, very simplified. You're expressing the pain, you're expressing how it was solved for, and you're expressing the outcome, and you're doing it really, really quickly. Like those types of skills matter a lot, right? Whereas, for example, when you first start in product management, it's not uncommon for like an associate PM fresh out of college um, to really be more of a project management type skill set, very execution based, right? And the difference there is, hey, we have this specific metric we want to move, and we want to move it by doing X, Y, or Z. And sure, the door is always open for the PM to, push back on strategy and so on and so forth. But it's largely go and do for the most part. And as you move up, you also move up in that life cycle, right? To where a senior PM, it's here's a metric we want to move. We want you to go figure out how to move it. And then you get to group PM or director, and it's like, what's the right metric for us to move? And that's where,
Mhm.
the different elements of communication all of a sudden changes throughout that journey, as well as your audience, right? The way you have a conversation with a scrum team and your peers is significantly different than the conversation that you would have with, for example, an executive group or so on and so forth. And so like when I think of one thing to over rotate on when it comes to trying to progress and trying to excel and where to get mentorship, it's all about communication.
Mhm. Do you have any advice of ways that people can better their communication? Because I feel like, I mean, me personally, I've read a couple books that like talk about like pitching ideas and like how to make things stick. But from your experience, do you have any ways that you've like bettered your communication or you've seen people on your teams improve their communication?
Yeah, I think like don't get me wrong, there's a lot of books that are incredibly helpful, but like if I'm being completely frank, trial and error is a big one, right? Like a lot of the things that I've learned throughout my career, I learned because I failed, right? And so when I think of ways to progress your communication, it's always evaluate what could I have done better, right? Even if you
Mhm.
succeed, what could I have done that would have made it better? For example, I recently had an executive meeting where I went in and the meeting was not as engaging as I would have hoped. And at the end of that discussion, I reflected and was trying to think of, what are the things that I could have done to influence it, whether it be prep, whether it be how I went through the conversation, so on and so forth. That is a skill set that I think is something everybody should be doing, largely with
Mhm.
everything we do, but with communication specifically. When you're junior, you're probably going to need to rely on your leaders. Hey, I have this big thing that I'm prepping for. Would you mind observing how I'm facilitating it and give me feedback on what could I have done to make the conversation more engaging? What could I have done to bring ideas out of my team or so on and so forth? And so like leveraging a mentor to observe and give you feedback is a great way to progress as well.
Yeah, I think that's super important because I play basketball. And so a lot of times, like as a player, you think you're doing everything right. You think you're like perfect and it's just like maybe the shot didn't fall. But then you go talk with your coaches and they'll show you film of exactly like what's going wrong. And for like me personally, I remember I'd be sitting there watching. I'm like, I played great this game. And then I'd go watch the film and I'm like, what am I doing out there? Like I look like terrible out there. Like, why did I do that? And I think having that other perspective just really helps in your growth. And also I think being open to like criticism and to growth is also like a really um big deal when it comes to like constantly growing. When it comes to like mentors, like you said, finding that person that can kind of give you that advice, like for people out there who are looking for those types of people, what's the best way to like approach them, or what's the best way to find a mentor, or like ask someone to kind of take that mentorship role for you in your career?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I recently wrote an article where I talk about vulnerability and how it's a superpower for product managers. To be completely honest with you, I'm a self-taught PM. Like I got started in product management before there really was education around it. I didn't get education from like an Ivy League school or anything along those lines. Like I'm largely taught from YouTube University and books. And so because of that, I really struggle with imposter syndrome. And as such, one of the things that I leverage as a strong suit is always being comfortable admitting that I don't know, right? And
Mhm.
leveraging anybody who can help me. And the thing is, same thing with networking. It doesn't have to be up the chain, right? For example, within my team, we have biweekly meetings, and we have a session that we call product critique. And in that, I invite anybody from the team to bring something that they are working on that they would like help from our team. And it can be a senior PM, a group PM, it could be an associate PM who comes in. It's like, here's what I'm working on. Here are my goals. Here's my plan, right? And everybody jumps in with feedback. It's not just
Mhm.
me, right? And so in these settings, look for the person who can do the job, right? If you're going in and there's an associate PM, even if you're training them, who cares? Hey, I want you to look for how engaged is the audience. Am I talking for too long before I'm opening up space for them to give me feedback and so on and so forth? Monitor for those types of things, right? And you can help them understand what are the things to monitor for.
Mhm.
Outside of that, you could also go to leadership, and really, I would recommend anyone do this. Is go to leadership and say, hey, here are the things that I think I need to progress to get to that next level. Clearly, that should be a conversation with them as well. But then you could rely on them. Hey, we talked about communication in this next meeting. Will you observe and give me feedback on how to improve? Right, like out. So I guess going back to your original question, how do you progress and how do you get mentors? It's out of vulnerability, right?
Mhm.
Be completely honest with you. This is something I'm trying to progress. I believe you can add value to help me improve. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah, I think one thing, like as a human nature kind of thing, we hate admitting vulnerabilities. We want to be like the strongest, and that's just ingrained in our, upbringing throughout the generations. But I know there have been many books that say like the best thing you can do is just ask, and like the worst thing that's going to happen, they're going to say no. And like a lot of people have this fear to ask out of like they're scared to mess up, or they're scared to like get a no, like rejection. They really hate rejection. So I think that point that you made, just ask, find the person who's either a step ahead of you or like is doing what you want to do, and just ask. And a lot of people are willing to help out and at least like give you some feedback that you can work on and keep executing on. I know we're kind of coming up on time, but for that is like our last little point. Do you have any other advice that you think is very valuable that PMs hear when it comes to career growth, PM growth, or just becoming a better, communicator?
I think you brought up something originally that I think was interesting, where you said, I see directors, VPs, chief product officers, and I'm like, you're so much higher than me. But let me shine a light on what it's like to be a director, right? Like I was recently promoted, and the fact of the matter is I'm the exact same person as I was when I was a junior PM. And quite frankly, if I'm being honest with you, I struggle from imposter syndrome more as a director than I did as a junior because I know where my shortcomings are. And the thing that I want people to know about that are trying to get into product management, who are trying to get coaching, is every single person is trying to improve. It doesn't matter if you're a chief product officer, if you're a director, if you're an associate PM, it doesn't matter where you are in that journey. We are all human. We're all going to make mistakes. And at the end of the day, like, be humble, be vulnerable, and it's totally perfectly fine. Like I told my team, one of the biggest things that I struggle with is now when I walk into the room, everyone quickly turns around and starts working. And I'm like, but I'm like craving that relationship with them. I'm craving hearing about what they did on their weekend and how their families are doing and so on and so forth, right? I'm no different today than I was 3 months ago, right? And so like that's something just to know from a director, if you will. The door is not closed. The door has not changed. I'm the exact same person, right? And genuinely, I want to help people succeed. And I believe strongly that many people in my position and in other positions feel the exact same way.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Because I remember, like me personally, because I grew up watching basketball. I grew up next to Utah State University, and so watching like those college players play, like I would see them and I would think they were like gods. I was like, oh, I can't like talk to him. Like he's like way up there. Like Jalen Moore was one of the ones I remember watching who was just phenomenal. And now where I'm kind of in that same spot where I play college basketball now, I look at myself and I'm like, why do you want to talk to me? Like I'm just some normal guy. Like why is this any different? Like I'll have little kids like staring at me at the store. And I'm like, why is this any different? But then, like, from my perspective, like you said, we're just normal people. And I'm sure for you, yeah, you want that interaction with your, employees, the people you're helping out to be that human relationship rather than like, yeah, oh no, the boss is in here. We got to hurry and get back to work. So I think what you've said today as we're kind of wrapping up is super valuable for anyone who is looking to grow in their PM career or get into PM. I'll post your articles that you've already written about networking and being vulnerable on my page. I think those are super valuable, especially for people trying to, grow and get better. But once again, I just want to thank you, Blake, for your time today. Hopefully someone, I mean, I know someone will find value in the stuff that you have, and hopefully this helps you and those out there who are really trying to grow in their careers.
Yeah, thank you.